Well, good evening and welcome to another webinar for the Howie Diet. Tonight's webinar is the 4 keys to successful plant-based eating. And I'm really excited about tonight's presentation, and I can't wait to get into it. I'm Paul Malkus, President and CEO of Howie Diet, and it's a real privilege and honor to have you join us again tonight. Welcome. And we're so thankful that you took the time out of your busy schedules to join us for this real informative and inspiring program tonight. I think you'll definitely leave motivated and armed with some additional tools on how to make changes that will improve our health. Before we get started, too, I'd like to do a few housekeeping things. First, you'll notice over on the left-hand side, there's a place for you to ask questions. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. At the end, we'll field those questions and get through as many of them as we can. And we'll try to get all of your questions answered, but feel free to communicate with us there. Tonight we have a real special offer for 5 lucky winners who stay through to the question and answer time. You'll be receiving autographed copies of Micaela's book, and you'll be real excited to receive that, and I know it'll be a real blessing and inspiration. So we encourage you to stay with us. And before we open, I'd like to just start with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we just thank you for this day and for this time where we can come together and share information, Lord. We pray that you'll cover all of the technology and the speaker, Lord, and that everything will run smoothly, Lord, and that the message will come out. We pray that we honor you in this presentation and everything we do. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, this evening we're really lucky and privileged to have Micaela Karlsen with us. And this presentation is going to focus really on the heart of the Howie Diet, which is so exciting to me. Sometimes we do them on product, but really what we're all about is the Howie Diet and making changes to people's lives, putting the principles into practice that deliver long-term and lasting results. And Micaela, she's going to tell you a little bit more about herself, but she's a best-selling author, highly sought-after speaker, and has worked closely with the likes of T. Colin Campbell. She's had a wonderful career of helping people and educating them on how to live a healthier and put into practice healthy habits. So, Micaela, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you, everyone at Hallelujah Acres, for having this series and for really happy to be here with you guys. And I think this is a good time to talk about these kinds of topics because we're in the midst of the holiday season and a lot of people are going home to their families. You're sometimes going to be in situations that are not necessarily compatible with your intentions about your diet. So I think it's always a good time to talk about strategy, but I think now is a particularly good time. So I'm excited to get started. So I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit. I have a master's in human nutrition from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I have a couple websites that I think are useful for people, plantbasedresearch.org, where it's a library of peer-reviewed research, and sustainablediet.com, which is a forthcoming support program for transition. I had the privilege, as Paul mentioned, of working for Dr. T. Colin Campbell, and I was the executive director of his foundation, which is now the Center for Nutrition Studies. And I really absorbed a lot of his philosophy, but also his sort of standards for evidence-based thinking when I was working for him. And it was really wonderful training, and I'm now headed in a research direction myself. I was also involved in the first Forks Over Knives book, and I just published my own book this summer, A Plant-Based Life, and a lot of the material in this presentation is discussed in more detail in that book. So I've also, personally eaten a plant-based diet for a long time, and I have, I would say, some personal experience with some of the challenges of sticking with a plant-based diet, and that's where some of the inspiration for this work came from. And my research interests now really center on the predictors and the factors that help people stick with their intentions in the long term. Because a lot of people do make changes initially, but it's really sticking with a healthy diet for your lifetime that will lead to improved health and improved quality of life. So the 4 keys that we're going to talk about tonight are 1, facing barriers and food addiction, 2, avoiding the use of willpower as much as possible, 3, mastering your physical environment, and 4, cultivating a supportive social environment. So if as much as you can incorporate these 4 practices, you're going to be so much more likely to succeed in the long term. So that's what we're going to talk about. But there's a prelude. Really, the reason that you want to practice these 4 keys is to make sure that you can make a commitment, go through withdrawal from the foods that you'd like to stop eating, and then maintain your choices. So this is really what it takes and what it looks like if you are successful in the long term sticking with your dietary intentions. And it's obviously not always easy and not always straightforward for most of us, or we wouldn't need to do webinars like this or write books about it. So starting with number 1, key number 1, facing barriers and food addiction. So here, this is sort of the prelude. In addition to the issues of food addiction, people face a lot of barriers already. This is a research paper that was published on a survey done in Australia. They asked people what their barriers were to eating a plant-based diet, and they were defining plant-based diet as like an omnivorous diet that's centered on fruits and vegetables, but I think a lot of the same answers apply to both. So people said they needed more information, they didn't want to change, family or partner is resistant, plant-based meals are not available, I don't have enough willpower was its own answer. We're going to talk about that. Someone else decides on what food I eat. I don't, reluctance to eat strange food. It wouldn't be filling. I would miss eating junk food. And then there's some misinformation, like there's not enough iron, or they'd be worried about their health. And of course, this is a very informed audience, and you all know that a plant-based diet is really the most straightforward path to improved health. So there are a lot of barriers in terms of the built environment and our culture already. But in addition to that, I think, biologically and socially, most of us are familiar with the concept of addiction, and there is now really a clear body of research that indicates that food can also be an addictive substance. And so there's a definition of food addiction. It's a disease which causes loss of control over the ability to stop eating certain foods. And scientifically, it's a cluster of chemical dependencies on specific foods or in food in general. So we have a survey question for the audience now, and just the question is simple. Have you ever felt like you had trouble controlling your eating? So if you want to just take a moment to vote, and I think we will see the votes coming in. Most people here, I'm impressed with anyone that says no, but I think it looks like the majority of the audience does have some kind of experience with that. And it doesn't mean that necessarily you're even overweight. But if you ever felt like you had trouble, then I'm hoping that this presentation will give you some good tools. So there's some background about disordered eating, and one thing that's kind of interesting right now is currently it looks like when alcohol and tobacco were declared substances of abuse based on the research several decades ago, there was some strong indication that that was the case. But today, there's actually more evidence supporting the classification of hyperpalatable foods, meaning highly processed foods, as addictive substances than there was back then for alcohol and tobacco. So there's a lot going on in this field, and in the field of food addiction recovery, there are 3 kinds of situations that people face, and people may have one of these or 2 or 3 together, but they all kind of add a layer of challenge. So some people are simply overweight or obese, and they may be normal eaters, but they just overeat, and they probably eat too much because we live in an environment that emphasizes food. Our portions are too big. We have too many eating occasions. But these people, if they make a conscious effort, can lose weight in a very straightforward way. They simply do portion control, or they eat less often. They cut out dessert. and they really tend to be overweight because they're eating too much, not because they can't control themselves, but just because of the environment. Then there are people with eating disorders, and these people may be normal weight or underweight, but they may have some emotional or spiritual challenges that they're facing. And this kind of issue, and most commonly this is either restricting or binging, usually requires therapy to address. And it may be concurrent with being obese as well, or overweight, or it may be its own issue. But apart from those two, then there's the chemical dependency on food, which is like a biological addiction. And here, eating certain foods triggers craving and eating beyond hunger in spite of the negative consequences. And you cannot solve this problem with therapy. These people cannot stop eating even when they want to. So I think there's a spectrum of how severe this can be for different people, and for some people it's quite pathological, and for some people it may manifest as just, you can observe that at a party you meant to eat only one of the appetizers and you just ate 3 and you really didn't want to, but it just happened. So there's sort of a range of what this can look like, but it is a biological issue because, of course, remember, humans we've evolved to eat as much as possible in every situation until we're full every time. And I think, this paper was published on the prevalence of food addiction, and they found it was about 7% of women and 3% of men, and it did increase with obesity status. However, I think really it's probably much higher than that, given what we just saw in our survey a few slides ago. Most of us can relate to this kind of issue, and actually there's a great book, I don't have it in these slides today, but if you want to read more about the processed food industry anyway, David Kessler's book, The End of Overeating, is a really good look, a really hard look at all of the processed food that is manufactured and what goes into that, and how many people struggle with stopping themselves from eating it, even when they're not even eating a plant-based diet. So these clinical symptoms for food addiction are, as I said, more common in heavier people, and obesity measurements were also higher in people who were classified as food addicts than in controls. So this food addiction does cause a problem for overweight, and people who are overweight are more likely to struggle. And it's very common, as we were just seeing from our survey, and what's important to know is both drugs and food reward activate the same neural circuitry in the brain. So the strongest effects from things like hyperpalatable foods, meaning potato chips, soda, danishes, pastries, sausage, all of these foods that are concentrated substances with added fat, sugar, and salt. And so some examples here of what happens, and the similarities with drug dependence are you have an elevated potency because of the way the foods are processed. They're absorbed into the bloodstream rapidly. Some examples are you start with a coca leaf. There are some cultures in the world that chew coca leaves, and it's a mild stimulant, but that can be concentrated and turned into cocaine or crack. Or you may start with corn, process that, concentrate the sugar, and you end up with high fructose corn syrup. And tolerance develops the more you consume. And then there's cue reactivity, meaning situations trigger consumption. And all of this leads to an increased potential for addiction. So, of course, you can have some symptoms of physical withdrawal, and you may be familiar with these, or you may have noticed them in your friends and family when they start to change their diet: fatigue, dizziness, headache, etc. All of these are common to drug withdrawal, and you can also, they may be less severe, but for some people they are as severe. You can also see these when you start to stop eating some of these foods. Now, withdrawal really, I think, is really individual, and I wish that we had strong research on the withdrawal from added fat, sugar, and salt in animal food. We really don't have that at this point, but we do have the observations of the clinicians that practice plant-based nutrition in their medical practice. And most of the clinicians that I've heard from have a feeling that the retraining takes between 3 weeks and 3 or more months. So I think it depends on the substance. It also seems to depend on the person. And you can notice, I think with sugar particularly, you can notice quite rapidly that if you stop eating sugar for, say, a week, you don't really want it as much. If you start to eat it again, you may be looking for the brownies the next day. But I think to be completely free of these cravings, it can take longer. I know for myself, when I stopped eating cheese, it probably took between 2 and 3 years for me not to feel a pull when I was around a pizza place or in the supermarket and there was macaroni and cheese in the hot bar. So I think it can actually take a long time, and it's important to know that when you're moving towards a healthier diet, there may be several steps forward and a couple steps back, and it's important to be forgiving of yourself and let yourself, have permission to go through that process, because long-term change, transformation can happen quite quickly, but maintaining a change over the long term, sometimes it does take a long time to really sink into that lifestyle. So to sort of deal with the addiction and the withdrawal, the strategy here is that commitment is essential. And of course, that's because our taste preferences are learned. They're not part of our personality, but we have to commit to waiting out the withdrawal period. So this applies to any number of different kinds of transitions or different levels of transitions. That can include going from omnivorous towards plant-based. Maybe you're animal-free, but you're still eating processed foods. You want to move more toward whole food. Maybe you're going to replace your soda with drinking water. Maybe you want to move from snacking on cookies to snacking on fruit or dried fruit. Maybe you want to move away from cooking with oil and switch to cooking with water or broth, or reduce your salt intake. So all of these kinds of changes are going to cause a feeling that you're missing something initially, and that's when you really have to wait out that withdrawal period, because that feeling passes. But the commitment is absolutely important. So that's sort of number one. So then how do you avoid falling off the wagon, and how do you get through that initial period and stay committed? That's where the next 3 keys come into play. So key number 2, avoiding the use of willpower. So we're starting with sort of the foundation of what we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis is pretty tough. And the food environment, the built environment, is truly an obesogenic and disease-promoting environment. We have so many examples of how our satiety and our feelings of being full can be overridden, and that's by how accessible food is, the eating occasions we face, every party, every social event. There's always food. When you're in the gas station, when you're in line at the supermarket, there's candy everywhere. When you're shopping online, food ads follow you on TV. There's marketing and advertising that those images will artificially stimulate hunger. And then, of course, our environment has a lot of decreases over the last few decades in physical activity, and the economic costs of calorie-dense foods have gone way down for the individual. So it's very easy to buy potato chips, soda, fast food, and for a lot of people, it feels like a better use of their money because they maybe are on a limited budget and they want to be sure that everyone's full and satisfied. So that all those challenges kind of come from the food environment, and to do something different, you're really like swimming against the current, and it's difficult. So as I was saying, the frequency of eating, the volume and quantity, the caloric density, convenience of food availability, cheapness of animal and processed food, all of this together adds up to a lot of need for many people to use willpower to say no to things. And in thinking about this from a behavior change perspective, the ecological model of behavior change, I think, is very nice because over the last decade or two, the conversation around obesity has really changed from blaming the individual to looking at what are all the influences from the person's individual characteristics out to their social network, out to the environment, to the culture, and then to policy that interact with each other and influence people to make certain decisions. So it's a much more constructive conversation, and it's much it's not blaming the person for their eating problems, which are like a challenge that they individually face the consequences for, but it's really not fair to assume that they were the total cause of that situation, because there's so many other factors from other facets of our life and our culture. And so it's important to think about that. And then the challenge, though, too, is we would love to change public policy and take away food subsidies and all these things that we can easily think of, but we can't really do that as individuals. So we need to strategize about how we as individuals can navigate these pitfalls and get through kind of the challenges to stick with our intentions. So it's, I think, helpful to look at what helps people stick with weight loss diets. Well, there are all these antecedents. This is a paper that has a conceptual model for how it works. Self-efficacy, outcome expectation, value perception, time, environment, social support, etc. All these things, they help people adhere. And I'm going to remember to use these tools that we have here. So you get to your adherence by having all these attributes. And then these are the attributes of your behavior. So you eat a low-calorie diet, you eat regular meals, exercise, monitor, and then the consequences are you can maintain your targeted weight loss, which leads to all these great health outcomes that we're aware of. So this is great, but what happens if people are not, they don't have these antecedents, but they're still doing the diet anyway? So that's when they're using willpower. And it really does not work very well in the long term. That's why diets, quote unquote, don't work, because this is not sustainable. It does not last. So people may not have any of these things, but they kind of force themselves to follow the behaviors, and then in the end they really can't stick with it. So this is a fantastic book. I feel like this is the China study of social psychology. It's so well written, and this is from Dr. Roy Baumeister, a researcher from University of Florida. He's a social psychologist. I highly recommend this book. His research has looked at willpower, and the primary purpose of willpower is not what we are using it for in the modern environment, which is to stop ourselves from eating too much. It really looks like the use of willpower more evolved to help us deal with social tensions, and that makes a lot of sense because in the past we lived in smaller groups and our survival very much depended on our relationships with the other people in our group. So now we're using it to regulate our eating, and it's a finite resource, which means that it gets diminished in the short term. And when that happens, cravings and impulsiveness increase. So this is a recipe for disaster in the modern food environment. And this is why a lot of people kind of feel like they're just staring at one small carrot when they are eating a diet. They're hungry, they're frustrated, and what's going on is when you're tired, either physically or mentally, or you have lack of sleep, or long periods of concentration, or you've made a lot of decisions, you end up in a state that Dr. Baumeister has coined decision fatigue, and you have your willpower diminished. You're much less able to make decisions that go against your cravings or your impulsive urges. So this can also happen when you have low blood sugar, like when you're hungry. So really, the modern food environment could not be better designed to induce decision fatigue around food, and that's because we're all very busy, we're very often very tired, and we face a lot of decisions every day about what to eat. So by the time we get to a situation where we're faced with some food that we're trying to give up or move away from, we just don't have the inner willpower resources to say no to it. And since your cravings and impulsiveness go up when willpower is low, what happens is that the more tired you are, the more decision fatigue you have, the more likely you are to give in. And then at that moment, things tend to taste more intense. So the brownie actually tastes even better than if you had eaten it when you weren't hungry or you weren't sort of tired. So this is not a good cycle, but most people I think can relate to this. And I just wanted to throw in another question. Have you ever felt like you had to use willpower to stick with your dietary intentions in any situation? So I think we'll skip to the results. Okay, so again, most of us can relate to this kind of need, and I have a feeling that for many of you that felt like you did have to use willpower, you would have rather not had to feel that way and had an alternate strategy. And I'm suggesting that I think that's a good idea because, again, we face so many food decisions every day that this can really wear down our resolve. So having to decide, I don't want to eat that, need to eat something else. We really don't want to have to make those decisions. You want to minimize the number of decisions that you're making each day. We're mostly unaware of this. There's a interesting paper from nutrition researchers at Cornell that we make about 200 food decisions daily, and most people are not aware of them. So the more decisions, as I was saying, that we make, the less self-control we maintain. And so the strategy here is you want to avoid relying on willpower as much as possible because you will be faced with situations where you do need to use it. You want to sort of preserve it as much as you can so that when you need it, you can whip it out and it'll be there for you. So that means pre-decide. There's a strategy also very much studied called implementation intentions, which means before you get to the situation and you're in that moment, you decide what you'll do, which means you may call the restaurant ahead of time, look at the menu, and then when you get there with your friends, you don't think about what you're going to order anymore. You just order what you had previously decided and enjoy the company. You want to bring food everywhere with you because you don't want to get hungry. That means keeping food, like snacks you feel good about, in the car, in your office, in your house. You want to drink enough water and get enough sleep so you're well rested. And think of your dietary transition, whatever it is, whether it's, vegan-ish or omnivorous but towards more plant-based, or even just changing one food like stopping soda. Think of it as a new hobby, which means you want to give some extra space and extra attention to yourself and to this new activity for a few weeks to a few months. You will know what works best for you. But you want to think of it as a new activity that you really need to make space for in your life. So I think it's important to look at what else is going on. And, if you're a tax accountant, don't pick March and April to change your diet. Wait till May and be realistic about how you can best support yourself and make space to make these new decisions and set up your environment, which we'll get to later on, so that you don't have to make decisions as much as possible. You want to avoid making decisions. You want to kind of map out your intentions, decide beforehand, and then you can just follow through with what you've already decided. And so focusing on keys 3 and 4, supportive physical and social environment, will really help with that, because the more compatible your environments are with what you want your life to look like, the less you'll need to make a decision, and the more supported you'll be, and the more of a default the healthy choice will be. So key number 3, making the healthy default the norm. So you want to think about how to craft your environment to reduce decisions and take stock of where things are, where they break down, and then plan ahead. You want healthy defaults. So that means keep your kitchen and your home stocked with only whole plant-based foods, or as much as possible with whatever arrangement you have with your family members. Look at your office and your work environment. Consider your travel routes, and for instance, if you always stop at a particular pizza place on the way home, get out a map and choose a different deli or grocery store or somewhere to buy food on the way home, and decide what you're going to buy, and then just follow through with that, whatever you've decided. And as I was saying, always bring food with you. So you want to remove all the unhealthy stuff from your kitchen and home, and have authentic conversations with your family members. Ask for their help. If you can ask for their help without trying to control them, often people respond very well to this, and they do want to support you, and they do want you to be healthy and happy and successful. And, if you have kids, of course, as they grow up and have their own, develop their own self-agency, you can't control what they do, but you can certainly set limits on what comes into the house. And you may want to strategize with your coworkers. It may be that nobody in your office is happy about the person who brings in the brownies and leaves them in the conference room because maybe no one wants to eat them. So maybe you can all agree not to do that anymore and make your work environment a supportive environment. And then plan ahead about, as I was saying, your travel route on the way home. So basically, especially during the first few weeks of a transition of eating differently, you want to make it absolutely as easy on yourself as possible to choose healthy food and as inconvenient as possible to choose unhealthy food. And the longer you maintain these choices, the easier it will become. So it's important to remember that all of these strategies, they're very helpful to kind of integrate into your lifestyle for the long term, but it's more important to do at the beginning because the further away you get from animal food and processed food, the more your tastes will change and the less those foods will call your name. And they will cease to look like food in some cases, and in other cases, you just won't be as menaced by them when you meet them at a party or at a restaurant or at someone's house. So again, take these strategies and really intentionally apply them for especially the beginning because that's when it's most important in terms of creating new habits. And that brings us into habit theory. So this is a new line of research that's really kind of exciting. It very much applies to plant-based eating. But habits are strengthened by repetition. Just by repeating a behavior, you can strengthen the habit. And intentions can shape behavior initially, but if habits really dominate when your intentions are weak or unformed or when your willpower is low. So habits are considered impulsive, and this is not a bad thing at all. It's just a way of describing a pattern of behavior that does not require conscious thought. So they can obviously be the bane or the blessing of a healthy diet, but when you're thinking about breaking old habits or creating new ones, there are a few other strategies that you can apply to your physical environment. So not just, in addition to getting the old food out and having lots of snacks, you want to think about maybe changing your environment because that can trigger you to feel different, and then it'll make it easier to do things differently. So you might want to shop in a new grocery store, even rearrange the furniture in your house, or take a different route to work. Again, use implementation intentions and create reinforcements for your new behavior. So subtly praising yourself or giving yourself a reward it may be able to help. And some of where this research comes from is that people who move to a new city often have an easier time quitting smoking than people who stay where they are. So you may not be able to just move to a new city, but you can take that information and try to apply it to your life. And if you can change your environment, again, that will help break up your old habits and you can move in with the new habits that you want. So to summarize, the strategy here is groom your physical environment as much as you can to support your goals. Assess, strategize, make physical changes. That includes food and perhaps even other physical changes, and list others' help and support with the environment, and put in some extra effort during the first few weeks of a transition to speed up your new habit formation. And finally, number 4, you want to build your social network to make plant-based eating the norm. And it's just something we all intuitively understand. Social environment does matter, and we do want to fit in, and it's a very human need to have affirmation from your community. This has been studied in research too, and it's very interesting to know that you're likely to have some of the same lifestyle and eating habits as your friends, and this is up to 3 degrees of relationship away. So not only your friends, but their friends, and the friends of your friends' friends. So behavior change does catch on in social networks, but things like smoking and exercise and diet spread. And so if you want to eat in a more healthy way, you might want to look at your social network and see if you have people that can be role models for you and people you'd like to be closer to whose lifestyles are more similar to what you want yours to be. And there are 2 sides of social support here. So first is retaining the connection with existing friends and family through your dietary change and not throwing out your friends and family. It's very important to not expect that you need to do that and not try to either, because a lot of people, when they make a dietary transition, they find it, at first it seems alienating, or they're worried that it may be alienating or isolating because their friends and family don't eat that way. So it's very important, I think, to not expect that you're going to get rid of the people that you love, but rather keep your relationship strong with them. And then at the same time, you want to reach out to existing plant-based communities, and Hallelujah Acres is a great example of this, to make friends that already eat the same way, the way that you'd like to be eating. And the more that you have these people in your life who really are embracing the diet that you want to eat, the less you sort of need affirmation from your friends and family who are not interested. So I think it's important to have both, and the more you can do that, the more full and happy you'll kind of feel about your lifestyle. So remember, normal comes from numbers, and the social network that you have really lead to this shared culture of health. And the more that you can seek out these people, the better. But first, when you think about staying connected to your current friends and family, remember they're not all going to get excited about plant-based eating. So try to give people the freedom to be the way they are. Share your thoughts and feelings with them without trying to control them, but stay connected without emphasizing food. So I think a lot of people will be really happy for you if you're starting to notice improvements in your health, your energy, you're just feeling better, you're feeling inspired. Some people may feel challenged or perhaps guilty because they're not, doing that themselves, and there can be all kinds of different reactions. So even if you really don't try to control people, your actions and your thoughts may trigger things for other people. So you just have to kind of, let them be the way they are and be how they are, and give them their space to have their own feelings. But try to think about ways you can stay connected to them without sharing food together. So maybe that means camping, hiking, going to see a movie, doing other activities, sports that really don't necessarily require that you're eating the same food. And I think it's really important, and so much of our culture involves food. Food and family go together, and a lot of our relationships center around sharing food. But if you can unhinge that in these kinds of situations, it can really help. So this is our last survey. How many of you have ever felt disconnected from a friend or family member because of disagreements about food? And looks like, again, most of us, a few people aren't sure. And yeah, a few more people. So that's really nice that we have some more no's here on this one. But many of us have felt disconnected. And I know that I feel this way with my own family members or my relatives sometimes, but I don't really expect them to jump on board with this kind of thing. So I just understand that that's who they are and that's where they are. And I'm lucky that I do have so many people in my life that do eat the same way as me, and that's very affirming. So in terms of, how to share when you're not necessarily on the same page with your family or friends, but you can always bring tasty dishes to parties and potlucks. You could try making special plant-based treats for family dinners or holidays. And then another thing is posting pictures of your food on Facebook. If you post your dinner on Facebook, I guarantee you will get a ton of positive comments, and often from people that don't even want to eat a plant-based diet, but they'll say things like, "Oh, will you be my personal chef? Oh, I wish you could come over. Wow, that's so delicious." It is very affirming, and it's very non-judgmental too. You're just sharing what you're excited about. So that's one way that you can get a lot of positive reinforcement for what you're doing. Because the holidays are coming, I thought, it's a little hard to write down these websites from the slide, but I would just Google vegan holiday recipes, and there are all these great things that, you don't want to eat this stuff every day to eat a truly healthy diet, but in the context of the holidays, and maybe you're going to be sharing meals with friends and family, you want to make sure there's probably a treat that you enjoy and also something that could introduce your diet to other people in a friendly way. So I think it's worth putting a little extra effort into cooking, and you can easily find lots of resources, so you may want to think about that in the next month or so. Then finding new friends. There's always in-person, like Plant Pure Pods, the vegan meetups, vegetarian societies, local cooking classes. You could think about acquaintances you have, and maybe you'd like to be closer to these people. And there's social media, attending conferences and special events, and then inviting some existing friends who may be open to the food to plant-based events. At the same time, for people that live in parts of the country where there are very few people eating plant-based, it can be very isolating. So for those people especially, social media is even more important. And I think you can follow doctors, scientists, dietitians, Hallelujah Acres, chefs on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can comment on posts. You can join groups and discussions. And if you're not sure about this, I really encourage you to give it a try. So just ask some younger family members for help if you're just getting started and you're not sure how to get going. It's very rewarding. It's very affirming. And finally, just stay involved. So there's so much out there that is a helpful resource. So again, to sum up here, the strategy is compassion and proactive connection. Keep your old friends and family. Don't expect them to jump on board. Share what you can, and then make new friends who are on board with the diet you want to eat, and you can seek them out in person and virtually. So dream big, pulling it all together. Just aim for as many elements as you can. Education, minimize your moments of food decision by setting up your environment to be supportive. Pre-decide and set intentions when you know you're going to enter a challenging situation. Craft a compatible environment. Keep old friends and make new friends, and take advantage of available resources. I'll close with just a few more resources of my own. The transition and support program, Sustainable Diet, that I mentioned, is going to be, the pilot program is going to be launching in the next year. We are offering 3-month total support, personalized for each person. We have a great series of lectures as well as some goal-setting coaching, and I'm very excited about it because I know books are great, they're really helpful. Sometimes people need the opportunity to get feedback and talk to a guide, and a book isn't quite there. However, at the same time, this is my book. I'm very proud of it. I'm happy for the people who I know are on this webinar are going to get a copy of it. And I published it this summer, A Plant-Based Life. Dr. T. Colin Campbell wrote the foreword. And it's really a strategy guide along with 100 recipes from myself and other people in the plant-based world to show the variety of different lifestyles they are. So thank you so much and enjoy. I'll turn it back over to Paul, and really thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Well, thanks, Micaela. Wonderful information, and it's inspiring, and we have some great questions to get to as all of us are sometimes struggling to maintain a healthy lifestyle. Before we switch over there, though, I'd like to go ahead and just share the Hallelujah Diet Starter Kit that's available. And, for those wanting to get started, this kit really does provide a great stepping stone. So it includes 2 of our flagship products, the Barley Max, which, of course, helps to detoxify as well as provide nutritional reinforcement, as well as Fiber Cleanse, which helps to clear the toxins out of the body. It has a 3-hour video that provides lessons and how to really start the day off good, as well as a simple weekly meal plan book, which has a month worth of recipes for getting started. So it's really a package that we put together to help people implement a healthy lifestyle and see results fast and quick. So I just wanted to leave that with you there, and we offered a really great discount price for first-time purchases. So to get to some of the questions, Micaela, and this is one that I've heard so many different times, and Mike asked, and other people did too, is when we're told to listen to our body, but how do we know the difference between when a body is having a nutritional deficiency when it's actually an addictive reaction to the body, missing the caffeine or the sugar or something that's more toxic to it?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. I know a lot of people have that question, and the concept of listening to your body in principle is great. But it is hard to really do that if you're not eating a very, for lack of a better word, a very clean diet, because your body is likely to deliver messages to you that are actually just cravings and they're not true needs. So I think, a lot of people, I'll give some examples. Some people eat, they start like a vegetarian type diet and they say, I was really tired. So I just listened to my body. I started eating meat again and I felt better. One thing to think about with a plant-based diet is it is less calorie dense than a diet that includes meat and eggs and cheese and processed food. So you have to eat enough calories or you will feel tired. And so you have to eat a bigger volume. So that's one thing. You have to make sure that you're not hungry. And for some people, they may not really feel an obvious hunger sensation, but they feel tired, and really they're not eating enough food. So that's one thing to be checking out. But in terms of other kinds of specific foods or cravings, I just think that listening to the body is it can be very misleading because our bodies really have one key agenda and message. They want us to eat as much as possible all the time because we evolved as mammals in an environment where there was scarcity. We didn't always have enough food. We had to search for our food. Like searching for food took a lot of our energy and attention each day. And so now that we live in this environment where we're faced with too much food, this is not something that biologically we're well equipped to handle. So a lot of the messages that we get can be misleading. And so I think if you can really sort of do a detox period and a cleanse and, there's no such thing, there's no nutritional need for sugar. So that's one craving that it's definitely just a craving. There's also really no need to eat added salt because what the need is for sodium, and people need about 2,000 milligrams of sodium per day, but that's about what you would get eating just food that has no salt added to it. So there's really very little need to eat anything that's salty. If you feel like you're craving a salty food, I can guarantee that's a craving and not a message. So I don't know. That's a pretty involved, long conversation. Like we could do a whole webinar just about that, but I think those are some tips to get started. I think listening to the body in principle is good, but it's hard until you're eating very healthy. I would be suspicious of messages that you believe are coming from the body.
Absolutely, completely agree. Carol has a question, and this really relates to so many that I've heard, and you touched on it a little bit. But her challenge is her husband, and he's a meat and potatoes kind of guy. And when she makes food with meat as a side item, he wants more, and so she gets frustrated with that. Feels defeated. Have you had any advice for people in that situation?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. It is so much easier to stick with what you want to eat when your spouse or your significant other is on board with that same choice. I think there are a few things I would suggest. One is, can she start by really having a conversation with him to explain why this is so important to her, and just really be vulnerable and explain, I don't know if she's worried about her health, or Carol, if you're worried about living longer or living better, you may be on medication or you're facing health issues or other challenges, but really explaining why this is so important to you that you want to try this, and then see if you can come up with a strategy with him where he would give you a little bit more support by, say, having his meat at lunch when he's out at work or out with his friends, and try to together kind of agree that in the house you'll minimize the meat that you're going to serve at your dinner table. And, I think that's the place to start, is see what kind of support you can garner from your spouse and get them on board with helping you, not necessarily changing what he eats. But then, if he really needs meat at these meals, you want to pick recipes that you, as you say, you can serve the meat on the side and he can have as much as he wants, but you don't have to add any if you don't want to. And I think if you're struggling with not eating the meat yourself, that can be a lot harder because you have it in your kitchen. So I think to start, where I would really start first is really share from the heart why you want to make this change, and ask him for what, together, come up with some strategies that will work for both of you in your relationship, where you can keep the meat away from the table or away from the kitchen as much as he can tolerate, and then he can have his outlet maybe out of the house. And I think if you maybe can come up with some other compromises in other things, I don't know what your relationship is like, but kind of involving him in your strategizing together to achieve what you want, I think it's possible that some magic will happen that way.
Yeah, yep. It can be a tough situation, but trying to get the support you can is important. And we'll make this our last question. I had a couple people asking, Jeff and Carla and somebody else, about the percentage of cooked to raw food. And I know it's tough. I'm sometimes, feel addicted to cooked food. So how do we balance that out, that addiction, and what kind of percentage would you recommend?
That's a good question. I feel like I'm not so qualified to answer that question. I think it's clear that in the past humans ate a lot of raw food, and eating a lot of raw food, it seems good. Common sense says it's good to include a big salad and lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. I wouldn't be so sure about a percentage, so I don't think I could say that, but what I do know is, I try to eat a big salad every day, and I usually have a fruit and vegetable smoothie most days, and I think that feels like enough to me. You certainly don't want to be cooking your food to death, so because there are some nutrients that are better preserved in fresh raw foods, especially like vitamin C. So I think I guess I think maybe I would turn that over to you, and if you say you feel like you're sometimes addicted to cooked food, that's kind of an interesting observation to make. And whenever I feel like I'm getting too addicted to something, then I usually try to give it up for a few weeks and kind of reset my taste preferences and reset my palate. But I mean, in general, I try to eat salad and smoothie every day.
Yeah, and from our teachings, we really want to try to get as much raw food in as possible with the living enzymes that are usually destroyed through the heat, and some of the other phytonutrients that are heat sensitive. But definitely getting as much raw in we feel is good. But we sure appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and Micaela, and for sharing your great information. And we're excited to be able to offer your book and to be able to provide it to the lucky winners. We've really enjoyed everybody being here tonight. And I'm looking for my list of winners that was sent to me, and I haven't found it yet. Give me just a second. I wanted to highlight them. I was moving around too many pages on my computer. We have Charlotte Coleman, David Bogdan, Kathy Sands, Rhonda Harvey, and Todd Davis. You'll receive a signed copy of Plant-Based Life, and we're sure glad that you participated with us as well as all the other participants. But thank you again, Micaela, for joining us, and thank you everyone for being on the call this evening. And we'll look forward to talking to you next month. And hope you have a great, healthy one, wonderful Christmas, and a healthy New Year's. Thanks, and God bless.
Thank you. Please stand by.